Hello, folks. This is Chris, KY4CKP, and today on LCARA Ham Radio, we're taking a look at a piece of software called Win4Yaesu. So we'll see you folks in just a moment. All right. Well, folks, we're here in the shack today, and we want to take a fairly brief look at some software that I've been using for about a month, maybe 5 weeks now, and it's called Win4Yaesu. And there's also an alternative piece of software from this author called Win4Icom. You may have heard of one or both of these, and they are there to allow us to remotely control our rigs to a pretty fair degree. For myself in my shack, I have the Yaesu FT 991 Alpha, and I think it's a pretty great radio. Has 2 meters and 70 centimeters, so it's the shack in a box, and some pretty good capabilities and performance. And I just haven't felt a whole lot of need to upgrade to anything else, at least not yet. There are some really great radios out there, and especially some of the newer, and as we know, some of the more expensive ones. And some of those can directly output to a monitor or pretty easily output to some desktop software to work with them. So today we're going to take a look at the Win4Yaesu version of this software, and it'll work with most of the FTDX line of the radios. If you can see on the screen there, you can see the mainstream FTDX, including the new FTDX10, but it also works with the slightly older 991 and 991 Alpha. Again, I have the 991A. So I wanted to just take a look at this and look at some of the features and capabilities. I don't use everything that this software can do because it can do quite a bit and it's still being developed. And I really hope that the author continues to put some really nice features in there. It's already a pretty nice piece of software. It's not freeware. It does cost money, so you have a 30-day evaluation that you can take with it. And if you decide it's worth the money, I think for the Windows version of this, for Yaesu, I think it was about $60. It may be the same thing for the ICOM version. But after using it for the 30 days, I decided I was going to go ahead and get this. It's not for everybody, but it is worth knowing what kind of options are out there for us. And even if we don't take an option today, it may be something we might take a look at tomorrow. So let's take a look at Win4Yaesu. I'm just here on the Win4Yaesu website. You can go to the yaesu.va2f SG, Victor Alpha 2 Foxtrot Sierra Golf, that's the author's call sign.com, and you can also find the ICOM version of this software in a similar address. And again, you can download a 30-day evaluation copy of this, so you have a decent amount of time to check it out and see if it's something you're actually interested in. And of course, if you're not, that's fine too. So you can download the software, but before you install and try to work with this software in your radio, there are a couple of things that you would need to really already have done. And one of those would be, here we've jumped over to the Yaesu website and we can see the page for me, the 991A. And you would, whatever radio you've got, you would want to make sure you have downloaded. So I clicked on the Files tab. Make sure you've downloaded the USB driver and that you have a proper USB cable to connect your radio to the computer. If you've used your radio and you've been playing around with various digital modes, and I've done a little bit of that myself, FT8 and others, you should be good to go on that front. You should have already downloaded the drivers and have your cable plugged in. If you've not done any of that, you would need to get an appropriate USB cable for your radio and make sure you have the proper driver downloaded. So that's something to think about up front, just in case you've not done any sort of digital work yet. Once you've got your cable and your drivers installed, pretty simple little driver install, nothing very complicated there. You've plugged in your cable and your computer recognizes the Yaesu unit. One of the other things you'll want to do, so I clicked here on Windows, this is right, Win4Yaesu. I clicked on the Windows key, and what we want to do is right click on that Windows icon in the Start menu and we're going to go up. This is Windows 10. We want to go up to the listing for Device Manager, right? Device Manager. When you open Device Manager, what you're going to want to look for in the list of all the devices on your computer, midway, just below midway in the screen, you should see a listing for ports, COM and LPT, communications and line printers. Old terminology there, but the concepts are still around. And once you've got the proper driver for your radio installed, what you should find, what I found for mine at least, is that COM port 3 and COM port 4 that you can see on the screen, those were created for the Yaesu once I had installed the drivers and connected the 991A to the computer with the USB cable. But pay attention to these COM ports, and you might make yourself a note. Notice that one of them, the COM port 4, at least on my system, it could potentially be different on yours. So you just go take a look. But notice that my COM port 4 is shown as enhanced, and the COM port 3 is shown as standard. And so what we're going to want to work with is the one that's enhanced. So for me, it's going to be COM port 4. Again, on your system, it might be different. Could be flipped around potentially. Your enhanced might be 3 and your standard could be 4. So it's just easy enough. Go and take a quick look, maybe make yourself a note. We're going to be working with the enhanced COM port 4. So we've checked on, and it also helps verify that your USB drivers are installed correctly. So we know that our drivers are installed. We know that we have our COM ports that we're going to need to reference, particularly the enhanced one. And so for us, it's COM port 4. So let's go ahead and take a look at the software. Now I've got a couple of other things running on my screen here because I do use a slight combination of things. You definitely may not be using the same combination of software I am, and that's perfectly fine. But towards the right-hand side, in the lower right-hand side, this is the Win4Yaesu. When you look down here, the bottom corner on the right, you can see the Win4Yaesu main window, and then I also have the RSP1A and the SDR Uno capability as a software-defined radio plugged in. Now, some radios, you can actually pull the waterfall right out of the radio over your USB connection. My understanding is you can't do that with the 991A, or at least I've not figured that out. So for my waterfall, I use my SDR. And I'll show you how to kind of hook that up briefly. Every situation can be a little different, but kind of show you how I'm doing that. So you might not be running that particular window at all. It just depends on whether you want or feel like you need that. My radio is over here on my left-hand side, just down a little bit. So it's not hard to work with it, but it is nice when I've already got other things on my screen to have this this kind of an interface for it. And so I've really gotten to where I like it pretty well. I'm not going to call it perfect, but he's still developing on these suites, and I think they're good now, and I think they can definitely get better in the future. So we're looking here at the bottom right-hand corner of the window. We're looking at the Win4Yaesu suite, the main window. Now, the first thing I want to point out here is if you go get this software, whether you get the Icom version of it or the Yaesu version, it's going to look different than mine. Okay, I have already customized the color scheme. There's quite a bit of customization you can do for the colors. You may not bother to change any of the colors. My home office here in my shack, I've kind of stumbled into a red, green, and black sort of a color scheme, at least for now. And so I've kind of been putting things together and coming up with sort of color schemes and things that are red, green, and blue or black. So again, yours will look a little different, and you may not bother to change it. All the layouts and stuff are pretty much the same, but just some of the colors might be a little different. But if you're interested, there are ways to change some of those colors. So if we just take a quick look at this main window, the very bottom right corner there, you can see there's quite a bit going on, and that's because it is pulling most of what's in the radio out here and helping to make it sort of easily visible. If you think about a lot of radios, ICOMs or the Yaesus, they're going to have some amount of menus and things, right? Most modern radios have touchscreens on the front these days, and they're going to have some level of menus and things. With the Yaesu, particularly with the FT991A, you've kind of got two levels of the menus. You've got the initial menus, which you get to with the menu key. But then if you do more of the long press, you've got the in-depth menus, of which people are known to not always be completely happy with the way Yaesu has done their menu structures, and I can understand that. But one thing that's nice about this software is the sort of top level menus, the stuff that you might get into maybe a little bit more often, is now through the software pretty much right here in front of us. And then, and we'll come back to this in a minute, but let me just preview this for a second. If I go under the Tools menu at the top of the Win4Yaesu window, and you notice there's a section under there called Radio Menu Items. I'm just going to open that. We're going to come back to this in a minute, but these are the in-depth menus that the FT991 has at least. And all those in-depth menus are kind of right here. So even though the order and stuff, that we sometimes make a little bit of fun of, is still, of course, Yaesu standard. It's right there, though. It's right there and easy to get with, right from this new interface. And so, in many ways, I feel like the software really helps make it easier to interact with your radio. Now, some of the newer ones are a little bit nicer, and maybe we feel like they have a better menuing system. Hey, that's great too. But for the radio that's in front of me, this is some pretty nice software. It helps smooth over some of the things with the radio, even though I very much like the radio as a whole. So again, the ability to change the bands. Now on my interface, again, I've changed the colors a little bit. Green is a deselected, button or whatever, and then the hot red is kind of the selected one. So that stands out. You can select your bands very easily from this interface. You don't have to go touch the radio. You really don't hardly have to touch the radio at all anymore. So if you're already on the keyboard and the mouse, which not everybody is, but for those of us that are already kind of here because we're doing other things, looking up call signs and things, using our logging software, it's nice not to have to keep reaching over physically and still having to do some things with the radio. So you can change your bands, you can change, your modes, all the modes you can see right down there kind of in the center left. Those are all there. You've got volume control. Notice it has the AF gain. And so what's nice is if I raise it here, hopefully you can hear a little bit of there's a channel there. It's a little scratchy, but you could hopefully hear that. But I can still use all the controls on the radio are still live. If I change something on the radio, it changes my software. In fact, it changes all my software. But like if I manually scroll, if you watch the 14277 there on the Win4Yaesu interface, if I manually scroll my radio, you see it starts tuning. And if you look at the waterfall, you'll see it's moving. Now it just so happens my logging software, which is Log40M version 2, if you look in the upper left corner, you see it's moving too. So I can use any one of those interfaces to interact with the radio, but if I do manually interact with the radio, it updates all those interfaces the way I have it set up. So that can be pretty convenient. But you can tune right through this interface. Now it's I'll say it's not maybe the sort of most fluid way of tuning things, but you could definitely get used to it. You get used to almost anything if you just are willing to put in some time and get used to it and build up that muscle memory. But you can tune the radio because you can change your bands, right? So we were seeing that earlier. That's really easy. You just click on a button. Now, if you want to tune the radio, and this is one of those things that I would say is not probably user, intuitive, and that is you see this sort of giant slider. And that's going to be really tempting to click and drag that and think, hey, I'm going to tune my radio. Well, you will be tuning the radio, but probably not quite the way you think you would be. Let me show you what I mean. Notice right below, and you can see VFO-A and VFO-B, right? VFO-A is the larger one on top, and VFO-B is the one on the bottom. And you can see a button right there. You can switch between A and B. But notice we have these other buttons, and they stand for fine, medium, and coarse. Okay. Even though it's COR, it stands for coarse, like coarse grained wood or coarse sandpaper. If you go to fine and you look at the numbers up here, 14, 292, 200. If you look at that very last zero, in fact, I highlighted it. If I drag the slider, look what's updating. Only that last position's updating, right? That's on fine. If I go to medium, you'll never guess what's going to happen. the second position is going to start updating. Okay, there we go. If I go to course, guess what? That third position, or the first position after the dot, if you will, it's going to start updating. So the slider does interact with the VFO, but in all three of its configurations in a pretty minor way. But that doesn't mean you can't interact with the VFO. There's actually two ways you can interact and potentially navigate around. The first is you can click on any position. Let me click on the very first one over there, right? Since we're on 20 meters. If I take my mouse scroll wheel and I scroll up, look what's changing. Okay. Again, you can also, retune the band, you click on one of the buttons. Now, if I click on the first two and I start using my scroll wheel, I can start scrolling there. So I can always choose the position I want to manipulate with the mouse and then start using my scroll wheel, and I can tune that up and down. So I do find this a little bit quirky about this interface, that the slider, which looks very tempting and looks like it would be for tuning the radio, and it is, but it has a fairly limited use. I'm a little bit surprised that you can't click and highlight your position that you want and then maybe move the slider. But even if I do that, even if I click and highlight first, it goes back to the fine, medium, and coarse settings that it has. That would be something I would like to see in a future update, where a little bit better tuning interaction with the software. It can be done. You just have to kind of get some practice with how it is. It's just maybe a little bit quirky. But you can still tune from here. You can still click on things and use your mouse cursor. They've got the up and down arrows too. If you don't want to use the mouse scroll wheel, you can use these up and down arrows too. Now, there's another way you can tune your radio. If you know a specific frequency, so if you look at the top right of my window, I happen to have a web browser wedged in there, and because I'm usually looking up stuff on, I have QRZ open, and I have the band plan open, and 2 meter propagation, and I'll have different things open for quick reference. And one of the things I like to do some parks on the air, but I like to chase parks on the air as well. And you can go to the Parks on the Air website and you can look at whoever's active, whoever's been spotted. So let's just pick on one of these. One of the recent ones, 14260. Somebody's working right now at 14260 down in Florida. Well, if I want to jump right to that, okay, if I click on the VFO window, if I double click it, a direct entry keypad pops up on the screen. Hopefully you can see that. So if I want to go to 14260, I can just enter that in and I can jump straight there. Okay, so if you see something, or if you have a reference point from somewhere that you can't click on to tune the radio, but you know the exact frequency, just double click on the VFO window and it brings up the direct entry keypad, and you can go just right to any frequency you see. Another one that's up here, let's find something that's not digital or CW. 7283? Let's go to 40 meters. Let's go to 7283. Let's see if we hear anything. Don't always hear the POTA folks because they're working portable, and they're usually working with a compromised antenna and anywhere from QRP to maybe 100 watts. So sometimes you can hear folks, sometimes you can't. But if you'd like to go hunting for them, you go to this page and it'll show you all the ones that appear to be currently active. And again, you could easily directly type in those frequencies. Now I've got again some other software. I've got Log4M. I can control my radio through Log4OM, and I've talked about some of these software packages and things before. I've talked about Log4OM before. We have a video on that. Mostly what I want to talk about today is just this Win4Yaesu. So you've got your kind of initial level of menu items presented right here in front of you. You can see the the S meter. You can see I've got SWR up there. Now these little meters right here, you can change what they show too. Like I've got S units. When you look at those meters on the left hand side, but if you right click right on the meter, you can change it. So if I want to see power on that side, I can switch it right over to power, just like you can look at power on the radio. On the right hand side, if I kind of go over there, and I've currently got it at SWR, but if I'd rather see, the ALC, I could have it showing ALC over there. So you can work with these meters and change them around very, very quickly. So even if you may have sort of your favorite default that you tend to put them in, if you want to check something like power output or SLC or something very quickly, you can just quickly turn one of them over to that other option, and then you can see it really fast and double check your settings and things. So I thought that was a nice feature. Memory modes, you've also got lots of settings. Of course, the volume, the RF gain, squelch control, RF power, monitor and the different gains. And then you've got some of your filtering right here, noise blanker, if you're needing that, dynamic noise reduction, you want to turn on the dynamic noise reduction. And of course, you've got your um, different settings for DNR, and you can, check those out and see which one sounds best for that, that particular. There's our 2-meter repeater identifying down in Somerset, about 65 miles from me. So again, most of your controls that are pretty close to the surface on the 991, they're all right here on the surface for this. So I'm going to go ahead and turn down the 2-meter radio just while we're talking here. But it's always nice to be able to make contact with that repeater, even though I'm a good distance away where I live. So you've got most of those things down there, the contour, right, the notch filter and stuff. It's all right there. You don't have to go immediately into any menu levels to see that. So again, what would usually be kind of that first menu level deep, it's all kind of right here on this software. And then we'll talk about some of the other things we can get to pretty quickly here. You see there's a Windows menu option here in the main, Win4Yaesu window. Club logs, if you do that, I don't happen to use that, but if you want to use the club log feature, you can use that. Opens up a little sub window there. If you want to see the CW terminal, I don't do CW myself, maybe someday. But if you want to try to work with that, most of what I've heard with some of those is they're a little bit hit or miss. But you have to understand the speed of the keyer, and if it can be a little challenging to get the right speed so that they can translate correctly for you. But if you can figure that out, some of those can work okay. And then you've got frequency memories. Now this one's kind of cool. With the FT991 Alpha, because it has 2 meters and 70 centimeters as well, you can have the memories program for that, right? So I can bring up all my memories. So if I want to go down to 2 meters or 70 centimeters, I can get to all my memories right here. Don't have to go back and start digging around in the radio interface itself. So he's done a pretty good job. This ham's done a pretty good job bringing stuff and making it more convenient to get to these things and be able to enjoy them. So you can see I've got a pretty fair number of memories in there if I want to use that. So that's handy. It's right there at your fingertips. Also, you can do macros and things. You can have this program start other programs and have this program shut down the radio and things because it can help control some other packages. I don't have anything real fancy with those set up yet, but I might set a couple more things up down the road. It's also got this shortwave database. If you like to do shortwave listening, it's got some of the well-known and common shortwave channels out there and what kind of frequencies they're on and some different things. So if you like to do that, again, right here at your fingertips. So I like a lot of what they've done with this, the ability to customize the interface, at least with the color scheme. That's one thing you sometimes run into with a software package. And I've done minor bits. I'm in the IT industry. I've done minor bits of software development and been around software development. I know it's kind of tough, and especially GUI interface design. Trust me, I know that GUI interface design is tough. So I definitely, can give other developers the benefit of the doubt on some of this because that part of it's really tough. Doing the software is one thing, but then trying to put an interface on it, So I think, they've done a pretty good job with this, making things accessible. You can see I'm using the SDR RSP1A as my software-defined radio to provide my waterfall. I've got that hooked in. So let's take a look at that real fast. Let's go to the, and you've got the parametric equalizer if you want to, let me bring that over here. If you want to work with that. Again, I don't really set a whole lot of stuff up. I haven't really got into trying to customize my audio and stuff. I might play with more of that later. I do a fair amount of DX and usually just want sort of a little bit higher, cleaner signal, so I don't try to add a lot of bass or anything back into it. Let's just go to the main settings for this. And of course, they opened up on a different screen, but I'll drag it right over here. And so there's some stuff going on here. We don't have to worry about all of this because I don't use all of it, but I'll touch on a couple of things. When you're on the first tab in this settings interface, hardware and user preferences, you'll see the COM ports, right, that upper left corner. And this is your main interface for having the software talk to your radio. So for this one, I've chosen the COM port that I know my radio is on. So remember, we looked at the device manager in Windows, and we saw that two COM ports were put in there, COM3 and COM4, and we saw that the enhanced one was COM4. So when I come into Win4Yaesu, I'll put COM4 because it's the enhanced one for my radio, and I've set my baud rate, right? So I've set my baud rate. So if we open the advanced menu again, well, let me cancel that one for a second. If we go back and open, where were we? Tools, the radio menu items, right? Where you have to go down into the nitty gritty of everything. And I don't have this memorized. There it is. The cat rate, 031, the cat rate. I've got my radio set to 38,400. So double check what you have your radio set to. Once you know what your radio is set to, then when we go to the main settings, let me drag that back over again. We know we're on COM4 because it's the enhanced COM port, and we know it's at 38,400 for the speed. And the button that currently says disconnect, you would click on because it would say connect. And click on it, and it should connect to the radio. And then the button says disconnect because you're connected. So now we can talk to the radio, and now we can start controlling the radio. Now, as add-ons, which not everybody I know is going to do, but let's just mention them just briefly. I've got the RSP1A software-defined radio from SDR Play, and so you can see here I activated that. I said I've got the SDR Play connected to an antenna, and then when you save your settings, it can go out and look. And if your software-defined radio is connected to your computer via USB, and that's recognized, whatever SDR you may have, use their directions on how to get it configured. Then this can take advantage of that. And so that's what I'm using for my waterfall. Other preferences, again, macros and things. I'm not doing too much very fancy with any of that stuff, at least not yet. Mostly I just use this for my daily operations and things. But notice we have a few more tabs there at the bottom. Let's go to the next tab over. So when you go to the next tab over, this software can potentially control several other pieces of software or hardware. And that's how I've got it hooked in with my logging software. So my logging software of choice, pretty much the entire left-hand side of my screen, is called Log the number 4 OM version 2. And I had to set some things up. That's a separate a video ultimately, but set up some COM ports and things so that I can have Log 4 OM working with Win4Yaesu, working with the radio. And you saw that they all work together. Anytime anything updates, they all update. And I can control my radio from any of those positions, or I can still control the radio manually on the controls itself. So this first section here is actually the only one I'm using. You notice it says disconnect because it's the only one that's connected. The rest of them would still say connect. But I set up a COM port for that. The baud rate to the radio is 38.4, and so that's connected. So the log 4OM is going with and through Win4Yaesu, and Win4Yaesu is controlling the radio. So you can see you've got several options there. You've got 6 options where there may be some things you might want to set up. Now it can get a little tricky setting some of those things up, and I won't go into a lot of details in this video, but there's usually some help out there with whatever piece of software you're trying to work with. So that's pretty much all I have setting up right here. If you wanted to auto launch some things there at the bottom of that screen, if I launch this, I'm going to want it to open, log 4OM, I'm going to want it to open, whatever. You can put those commands in there. If there's other macros and things, again, I haven't gotten into a lot of that stuff because right now it's just the interface to my radio. I'm not trying to do heavy duty contesting and maybe some other things. Depending on your spectrum and what you're doing with that, again, I'm just having it use the SDR unit. So there's some other hotkeys that you can set up, things you might want to do or switch to. It has debugging for error messages and working with your keyboard. I don't use all the features, at least not yet, but I use just a few of them, and it has really improved my my ergonomics with dealing with my radio, and the comfort of working with my radio. Because when it's over here on the side, you're always kind of twisting it into awkward angles and things. So now I don't have to do that anymore. And so I found it a useful piece of software. Now it's again, I believe it's $60 US, and not everybody is gonna feel the same way about this. Not everybody's gonna feel like this is worth $60, and I understand that. I wouldn't call that cheap software, but if it is something you're going to use a lot, I think it becomes worth the cost, pretty quickly. If you enjoy your radio almost every day for a year, what does $60 cost you per day of a year? So it's an option, and I tend to be about options with a lot of things. Again, I work in IT, and with computers and things, it's good to have options, and then you can choose, right? Then you can choose what is of value to you. So that's a lot of the features here. There are some in-depth things, but that should give you a pretty good idea for the software. Make sure you've got the USB driver for your radio properly installed. You've got the proper kind of cable, and you know what your USB is. We looked it up in Windows. We looked it up in the device manager. Look for that enhanced USB port. That's the one you want. And again, there's help in the forums for these software packages, the ICOM version of this and this Yaesu version, and you can get help with that. But for me, it was definitely it was worth it, because I can control my radio from my logging software. I can control it from the waterfall. I can control it from the Win4Yaesu interface itself, and I can still interface with the radio directly anytime I want. So that's pretty much it, folks. Just kind of wanted to cover this. I've been finding this software pretty handy and useful, and even though it's not free, decided it was worth it for myself anyway. And it may or may not be worth it for you folks, but again, it's always good to know about options. So we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. This is Chris, KY4CKP, for Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. We'll see you in the next video coming out on Friday, 73.